From being attacked by multiple sharks at once to being mauled by a great white as wide as a car, we count down 7 of the most horrifying shark attacks on people in Australia. Number 7. Brad Smith. It was winter in 2004 when 29-year-old Brad Smith was surfing with friends at a break called Left Handers, 2 kilometres south of Gracetown near Perth in Western Australia. As Brad paddled his board for the next wave, he saw the open jaws of a massive great white as a car lunging at him. It knocked him off his board and bit it in half. As he fell into the water, a second shark moved in on him, as if they had strategically ambushed him. He punched and kicked the sharks, desperately fighting for his life, but he didn't stand a chance against the giant predators. They kept coming for him again and again, until he finally disappeared under the surface and the water around him turned dark red. His friends rushed in to help him, grabbing his body and dragging it back to shore, but it was too late. There was nothing they could do to save his life, and a memorial was held for Brad in Gracetown shortly after. Number 6. Sarah Kate Wiley. It was dusk on the 7th of January in 2009 when 21-year-old Sarah Kate Wiley was swimming with friends at the unpatrolled Amity Point Beach off North Stradbroke Island in southeast Queensland, Australia. As her friends splashed around in the shallows, Sarah ventured out to deeper waters. There had been storms recently, which had made the water murky. As she waded around in the murky water, something suddenly ripped her under the surface. Within seconds, a pack of 3 bull sharks moved in on her, severing both of her arms below the elbows and tearing the flesh off her thigh and torso. Bleeding profusely, she kicked to the surface and screamed out to her friends for help, but no one believed her. They continued splashing about in the shallows. Again, Sarah desperately screamed for help, and again, nobody believed her. It wasn't until her friends saw her surrounded by a pool of blood that they realised what had happened and quickly rushed to her aid. She was pulled from the water by 2 fishermen and dragged onto the beach. She was then rushed to the Princess Alexandra Hospital in the nearby city of Brisbane, but there was little they could do to save Sarah's life, since she had lost so much blood. Her body was cremated and a funeral was held for her 6 days later. Number 5. Nick Peterson. It was a Thursday afternoon at West Beach in Adelaide, South Australia, at the start of the hot Australian summer. About 400 metres offshore, 18-year-old surfer Nick Peterson and his 3 best friends were messing around in a dinghy, taking it in turns pulling each other around on a surfboard behind the boat. They had been towing Nick's friend on the surfboard when they decided to change over. They stopped and waited for Nick's friend to swim back to the boat. As he climbed in, Nick jumped over the side into the cool water. As he broke the surface, a giant 5-metre great white launched out of the water and bit down on his arm. It dragged him along the length of the boat and back, playing with him like a rag doll. In a panic, Nick's friends grabbed the boat's paddles and started beating the shark, trying to get it to release their friend. But it bit down harder, ripping Nick's body in half, and a second shark moved in to feed off his remains. As soon as the shark let go, Nick's friends grabbed his body and raced back to the shore. They ran up the beach in tears, screaming to swimmers to get out of the water. Police immediately closed a number of nearby beaches and a hunt for the predator was commenced. And once found, the state of South Australia ordered the shark to be destroyed. But Nick's parents disagreed, stating, "We acknowledge that the sea is, in fact, the shark's domain. We don't advocate the indiscriminate killing of any shark. They are to be admired, appreciated and respected." And Nick knew that. Number 4. Jack Brinkley and Norman Girvan. It was October in 1937 when Australia witnessed the true value of mateship. 4 lifesavers, Norman, Jack, Gordon and his brother Don, arrived at Kirra Beach in Coolangatta on the Gold Coast, Australia, for their regular surf to end the day. As they waded around, enjoying the cool water after a scorching hot day, Norman suddenly felt something rip through his flesh. He looked into the water and saw a tiger shark circling him. Bleeding profusely, he desperately screamed out for help. His friend Gordon, who was swimming nearby, saw the blood spraying out of Norman's arm and rushed over to save his friend. As a third friend, Jack, also swam over to help his friends, he felt something drag him under the water. He struggled for his life as a second shark moved in on him, attacking him again and again, leaving Gordon to help Norman on his own. As Gordon began to drag Norman to the shore, Norman let out another terrified scream, and a moment later he was ripped out of Gordon's arms and disappeared under the water. Their fourth friend Joe, who was standing on the shore, saw his friends being mauled and raced into the water, risking his own life to save them. As he finally reached Jack, the second shark attacked again, chomping down on Jack's left arm, almost severing it. But Joe wouldn't give up on his friend. He pulled Jack, who was bleeding profusely, to the shore as quickly as he could, and the crowd on the beach helped tend to his wounds. Jack was rushed to hospital, but sadly he died the next day. The local community were haunted by the incident, but commended both Jack and Joe for their bravery and presented them with medals of honour. A hunt for the shark responsible commenced, and it was eventually baited and killed. But sadly, no matter how hard they searched, Norman's body was never recovered. Number 3. Paul Buckland. In 2002, 23-year-old Paul and his friend Shannon were diving for scallops near Saddle Point in this Great Australian Bight, South Australia. They had spent the morning diving at 4 different locations and reached their last diving spot at around midday. Shannon dove first, and when he finished, he resurfaced an hour later and gave the shark pod he was wearing, an electric shark repellent used by divers, to Paul, who dove under the water and turned it on. Paul descended into the depths of the ocean, reached the bottom, and turned his shark pod off. And as he began his search for scallops, he looked up and saw the ominous dark outline of a 6-metre great white watching him from afar. Spooked, he turned his shark pod back on, and as he quickly ascended back to the surface, he saw the shark speeding towards him. He broke the surface of the water 20 metres away from the boat and frantically yelled out to Shannon, who sped over to him. And as he went to pull Paul into the boat, the giant shark attacked, lunging out of the water with Paul in its jaws, shaking and thrashing him around and ripping his leg off. Shannon rammed the shark with the boat as hard as he could, dragged Paul out of the water and held him for a moment before he sadly died in his arms. Experts suspect that the shark had been circling them for hours unnoticed, and when Paul had turned the shark pod on, the shark had not been deterred. By the time he would have spotted it under the water, the shark was already preparing to attack, and the pod would not have made a difference. Number 2. Shirley Ann Durden. The 1985 gruesome death of 33-year-old Shirley Ann Durden in front of her young family is one of the most infamous shark attacks in Australian history. Shirley, her husband Barry, and their family friend were diving for scallops near Port Lincoln in Peak Bay, South Australia. As they dove in and out of the water, their 4 children watched eagerly from the beach. When they finally decided to head back to shore, Shirley suddenly felt something chomp down on her. She let out a gut-wrenching scream, and in a spray of froth and blood, she was lifted high above the water as the huge fin of a 6-metre great white broke the surface. The shark thrashed around, bit down, and ripped Shirley in half, spilling blood out into the water around her. Horrified, her husband tried to swim to save his wife, but he had to be restrained from risking his own life. Boats rushed to the scene, but they couldn't stop the shark from devouring Shirley in front of her family. And when the shark finally moved on, all that was left was Shirley's headless torso. Sadly, the remainder of her body was never recovered. Number 1. Rodney Fox. Rodney was just 23 years old in 1963 when he was competing in the South Australian Spearfishing Championships. With an hour left of the competition, Rodney suddenly sensed a stillness in the water, an unnerving silence. Out of nowhere, he felt an enormous blow to his side and a searing pain ripped through his body. He was dragged through the waters in the jaws of a massive shark. It had ripped the flesh off his torso, exposing his ribcage, stomach and lungs. His mask was knocked off and he was quickly running out of air. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Rodney reached out to gouge the shark's eyes. Miraculously, it let go and Rodney was free. He struggled to the surface of the water and gulped in air with an overwhelming sense of relief. Then he felt the dreaded scrape of the shark's hide against his leg under the water. It lunged again, but Rodney quickly wrapped himself around it and was taken to the bottom of the ocean. They rolled around, the shark scraping rocks and weed to dislodge Rodney, who, desperate for air again, had to let go. He kicked to the surface and he gulped in air again. He looked down at the water around him. It was red with blood. And suddenly the shark's head appeared once again, ready to attack. Terror flowed through him, but before the shark reached him, it veered away and he felt the tug of the fish float that was attached to his belt. With the float in its mouth, the shark dragged Rodney 12 metres through the water. Quickly losing blood, he desperately tried to undo the belt, but his fumbling fingers could do nothing. But suddenly, in a twist of fate, the rope broke, and Rodney floated to the surface. He screamed out and a nearby boat raced over to pull him in. He was rushed to hospital and received 462 stitches and is considered one of the luckiest shark attack survivors ever. That's it for this countdown. Catch you later.